I use Apple Music, which is slightly different than Spotify Wrapped because it actually changes throughout the month of December. I took a screenshot and saved the picture of what my top artist and top album of the year were when it was released, and it is 10 plus days later and it's still changing. So I'm going to go off my first screenshot and I'm going to do an Apple Music chooses my TBR. So I've got a couple of things that I'm looking at. I'm trying to get different vibes, as many different vibes as possible. I don't want to just kind of choose similar sorts of books. I think it would be great to read a bunch of different books. So I'm just going to run through all the artists, everything that's on my kind of top albums, artists, songs list of the year, and then go from there. I already have an idea of what I'm going to pick, but I just would like to read and show you, and so you can see what I've been listening to. So my top artists were Spiritbox, Fall Out Boy, and Paramore. Spiritbox was a surprise gotcha. I did think it would be Chapel Roan. Chapel Roan, I think, actually was number 5. My top songs though were Feminine Armor. Oh my god. Feminine Armor. Red Wine Supernova. And After Midnight, all by Chapel Roan. So Chapel was there, she was there. And now that I looked at it this morning, Red Wine Supernova is actually now number 1, which I was saying, I think that Feminine Omenon actually became number 1 because I listened to the album that many times and it was the first song, and therefore almost by default it became the top song. But I'm not surprised that Chapel Roan songs are in my top songs of the year. My top albums, this has also changed now. But I think this is funny, so I'm sticking with this one. And it's only changed in that the order has changed. It's not that that things have changed that drastically. Number 1, the Stardew Valley soundtrack by Concerned Ape, which has now been bumped down to number 2 and replaced by Eternal Blue by Spiritbox. And third is Chapel Roan's album. So as you can see, different vibes. So there's a couple of books that I have in mind and that I think I'm going to read. I'm going to read one for each of my top 3 albums. I'm going to read one that somehow relates to Stardew Valley, one that relates to Spiritbox, and one that relates to Chapel Roan. For Stardew, I have a book on my TBR called Golden Ruin by Emma Kennedy, and I'm pretty sure the whole reason I saw this in the first place was because on TikTok the author described it as being inspired by Stardew. It's sapphic, western, Stardew themed, and so I'm thinking about picking that one up. For Chapel Roan, I'm not a romance reader, and to be honest, I'm trying to look at my physical TBR at the moment because I have a bunch of books on Kindle, I have a bunch of books from Libby, and also my physical TBR. So I'd rather not go out of my way to buy a romance book that's purely a romance book because I know I'm probably not going to enjoy it that much. So I was having a look on my TBR shelf and I saw that I had The Phoenix Keeper by S.A. McLean, and this is a sapphic fantasy romance. It's got magical animals, and I thought that maybe that would be a good fit. It seems quite light-hearted. It seems, I mean, it's sapphic. It fits the Chapel Roan blueprint. So I think that that's what I'm going to choose for the Chapel Roan prompt, just because I don't think, I don't know what else I'd pick. The day that I give 5 stars to a romance will be very surprising, but that's something for another day. And then for Spiritbox, I was trying to see what fits with the metal genre. And it's kind of hard to think about what sort of prompt would fill this, but I was sitting and I was thinking, I was looking at my TBR, and I realised that actually maybe something that was quite a gritty fantasy would fit this. And so I came up with The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie. I actually started this a couple of months ago. I had a Kindle Unlimited free subscription, and I had it and I started it, and then my Kindle Unlimited subscription ended and I never finished it before I returned it. But I didn't hate the beginning of it. I think I read maybe the first couple of chapters, and from what I know about the series, I think it is quite a gritty series. So I think this would fit really well if I'm thinking about looking at something a little bit darker, something a little bit heavier for the metal genre. So that's my TBR: The Phoenix Keeper, The Blade Itself, and Golden Ruin. And we'll see whether my music tastes align with my reading tastes. I don't know. So I'm 50% of the way through The Blade Itself. I started this just before New Year. So far we have a lot of different viewpoints. All of my main characters in different places, but all of the stories are slightly interconnected. We had Logan Ninefingers, who was on the run from the Northmen, who he used to work for. he ends up being summoned by a mage named Bayaz. Bayaz is mentioned in the blurb as bringing all these characters together, which has just now happened. Logan is a former warrior. He's quite tough. He seems like the sort of character that's true to his morals. We then have Inquisitor Glocta, who used to be a fencer and a soldier, and then he was tortured during a war which has left him disabled. It's caused him to be shunned, but also I think a little bit feared too. His main job is to go around and essentially torture confessions out of people. And then we have Jezal, who's one of our other main characters. He is a captain. He's quite young. He has a fencing competition coming up that everyone is expecting him to win. He's someone who comes from status, is doing this fencing because his father has wanted him to do it. It's not something in the beginning of the book that he particularly wants to do himself. He's a lot more interested in women and in drinking, but that seems to have changed, at least towards the midpoint of the book, where he wants to prove people wrong. He wants to prove a woman wrong that he can win this competition. At the halfway mark, we have just now got all of these characters in the same place. Logan has arrived with Bayaz, the mage, who is looking to cause a little bit of trouble, I think. A lot of the people in the court don't believe that he is this magician. They believe he's a fraud, and it's on Glocta to find out whether he is a fraud or not. And you also have Jezal, who's very distrusting of the fact that there is a Northman with this mage. So we'll see where it goes from here. It is very slow at the moment and quite character driven. I'm not opposed to a character driven book. I think that they can be really interesting, but I think at the moment it's just taken quite a bit of time for us to get to the point that we're at. There are a couple of other characters as well who we've kind of dipped in and out of. Logan Ninefinger's old group that he used to work with, who think that he's dead. I'm sure that'll come up at some point, that they find out he's alive and there'll be trouble there. We have another young woman called Pharaoh who is being tracked down as well by these soldiers, and we don't know too much about what's gone on with her yet, but I'm hoping we'll see more of that, as she's just been introduced as a point of view character. So we'll see where we go from here. So last night I finished The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie. I'm gonna give it 3 stars. It's a really character driven book, which I'm not opposed to, but it did feel like it moved along really slowly. The most significant plot points of the story did happen in the last 20% of the book, which meant that it was a long time of building slowly to get to that point. It's a series, and it very much feels like the entry point to a series. The end of the first book really sets up what the rest of the series is going to be. You know now, spoilers, you know now that they are going off on some sort of quest and that they're all banded together. You know that Glocta is away in another area of the world and has been tasked to understand what's going on there. So I can see that there is set up for the next book, but I don't think that the first book intrigued me enough to carry on in the series. I wouldn't be opposed to reading some of Joe Abercrombie's other work. I know he has a new book coming out this year. I know that he's quite well loved within the fantasy sphere. And then the whole point of this was obviously to read a book that aligned with my music taste. So this one was to fulfill Spiritbox being one of my top played albums of last year, of 2024. This book is classed as grimdark, and obviously, like I said previously, on the cover it does say delightfully twisted and evil. I don't really think it was twisted and evil. It felt pretty tame to me, and I don't really read a lot of grimdark, so I don't know if it was just that this is the start. There is brutality, there is violence, there's on-page and off-page suggestion of abuse, but I don't really think it was super dark. I don't know whether that picks up later on in the series, but I'm not too sure whether this was the best book for this album, but oh well. On a closing note though, I thought it would be nice to maybe recommend some of my favourite songs from each of the artists that I'm going to be mentioning in this video. For Spiritbox, if you haven't listened to Spiritbox, my favourite songs are Circle With Me and Jaded, and also the Megan Thee Stallion Cobra rock remix that they did. That is probably one of my most played songs, and I'm quite surprised that didn't make it higher in my most played songs of the year. I was expecting to see that on there because the past couple of months that's all that I played on repeat. So I started my next book, which is The Phoenix Keeper by S.A. McLean. I've only read the first chapter, but we've been introduced to our main character Isla, who works at a zoo, and she specifically looks after the birds. We've met one of the phoenixes, but aside from that we don't know much more yet. So I'm gonna see how this goes. So far I'm not the biggest fan of the writing, but I'm only a chapter in, so I don't want to jump the gun too much. So we'll see where I get with that. So I started The Phoenix Keeper. I just want to take a minute for the book because I think it's a really pretty edition. It's really pretty all over, and the end pages too are really nice. Let me get the other one. All of that is to say, I've DNF'd it. I got 17% of the way through, and I don't DNF often. Normally I will push through a book even if I'm feeling a little bit unsure about how I'm feeling about it. I just knew that I I didn't really want to continue. Like I said, we follow our main character Isla, and she is a zookeeper. We're introduced to other main characters. We're introduced to her best friend Tanya. This is a bit of a spoiler, but there's 2 potential love interests, only one of which is mentioned in the blurb. So we have Connor, who works with the dragons at the zoo, and then we also have Luciana, who also works with the birds, specifically the griffins. The dialogue between the characters just felt really young. It does feel like it's a YA book and not an adult book. The characters are meant to be in their late 20s. I think they're meant to be about 28, and they just speak like they are 17, 18. They're meant to be quite established in their careers, and it doesn't really come across that way. Luciana and Isla are also rivals. I did read a couple of reviews that explained that I think they met at college. I'm not too sure. I didn't read that far. But the dialogue even between them just feels really childish and immature, and I didn't really want to put myself through it for the rest of the book, if I'm honest. It's a little bit disappointing. It's my 4th book of the year so far, and I've had to DNF it, and it's especially disappointing when it's such a pretty edition. I'm getting pretty good at not just buying books straight away and waiting for them to come through at the library, but I just thought, oh, what, you know, I'll take the chance and I'll buy the book, and ultimately I've DNF'd it. So I'll be donating that. But I started and finished Golden Ruin by Emma Kennedy last night, so there's wins and losses. Golden Ruin follows our main character Cassidy. She's from Chicago, and it seems that most of America is ruled by what's called the Corporation. I would describe this book as a Western cyberpunky book. There is a lot about androids and kind of technology. She herself has a prosthetic arm that's made of this synth technology, as they call it, and also ocular implants as well. And she goes to California, where she takes up this job on a ranch with Willa. This town in California is one of 2 that doesn't have any tech at all, and so they're kind of distrustful of her at first. And as things unfold, we understand a little bit more about the reasons why Cassidy is in this town, why she left Chicago, what she's looking for, her developing relationship with Willa, and the history of Willa as well. I gave the book 3 stars. I quite liked it in the beginning. I thought it was quite interesting. We have these tensions with Willa and Cassidy as they're kind of not really sure how to act around one another. As the book went on though, there was a couple of things that were a little bit of an issue for me. Not to get into too many spoilers, there is a part of Cassidy's backstory that well, it's hard to explain without spoiling it, but let's just say there's a part of Cassidy's backstory that doesn't quite make sense, and that part of the story feels like it was run through quite fast. It feels like the first half of the book was developing all these relationships, and then the second half of the book is the really prominent part that deals with her backstory, and it just happens really quickly. Ultimately, I think the latter half of the book was weaker. I gave it, like I said, I gave it 3 stars. I think I would recommend it. I read this one because I had the Stardew Valley soundtrack in my most listened albums of last year, and honestly, there was not enough farming in this. Considering the fact that Stardew was used to sell the book, I don't feel like there was enough farming. There was some farming, but just not quite enough, but maybe that's just from my perspective. There was definitely gritty elements, kind of gritty Western elements. There's bandits, there's this threat of the Corporation. Cassidy has had to up and leave. So there is some grittier elements, and obviously Stardew Valley, well, I don't know if you've never played Stardew Valley, it's not just a farming game. There's mining, there's fishing, there's community aspects. I get why Stardew has been used as a selling point for the book. I'm not too sure how I feel about that. I do have favourite songs on the Stardew Valley soundtrack, because I am one of those people who, when they have listened to soundtracks, it has their favourites. My favourites are the full songs. I really like the mine songs as well, specifically Mines A Flicker in the Deep, and also Nocturne's Ice. I think it's a nice soundtrack, and I recommend the game if you've never played it before. I've been playing Stardew for I think 6 years now, and I've got a lot of hours. I've got several hundred hours, I think close to 700, so it's a recommendation from me. So because I DNF The Phoenix Keeper, I was thinking about what other book that I could read to fulfill the kind of Chapel Roan sapphic prompt, and Libby had the audiobook of An Island Princess Starts a Scandal, so I'm going to give that a try. You'll have to bear with me for all the change angles. I'm trying to figure out where it's best to film in the house, and it's not as easy as you think, because the lighting everywhere just feels terrible. A quick update, I am 63% of the way through An Island Princess Starts a Scandal, and I'm liking it so far. It follows Manuela, who is a island princess. She's from Venezuela. She's spending a short time in Paris before she is due to be married. She's marrying for financial reasons, to get some more stability for her family. But while she's in Paris, she's hoping to experience any sort of debauchery that she can before she is married. We're introduced to the love interest in the first chapter, who is Cora, who's a duchess who's made a name for herself in Paris and is hoping at some point to return to England. The two of them meet, they share a brief moment, they don't learn each other's names, and then they end up meeting again the next day in a more professional setting where they find out it's the two of them who are going to be engaging in this potential business deal. So there's a lot of scheming from Manuela. She's a person who knows what she wants, and she's determined to get it. I am liking it so far. I wasn't too sure what to expect. It's obviously a historical romance, and I read some historical books, but not often, and I think it has to be very specific circumstances for me to enjoy them. So I think this probably hits the mark in that it's a sapphic historical romance. I'm hoping to finish the rest of it tonight after I finish work. So I finished An Island Princess Starts a Scandal. I'm thinking I'm giving it 4 stars. I think it was a fun read. It was relatively easy to read as well. There was a lot of drama, a lot of salaciousness. There was a big third act conflict, and it all got resolved, and I think it got resolved in the best way that it could, I think. There was a lot about women's autonomy and women making a name for themselves and their own businesses, which I really appreciated as well, considering the time period in which it's set. So yeah, I think I'm settling on 4 stars. I know there are other books in this series. I kind of just jumped in because this was the sapphic one. I might look into picking up another book by this author. As for song recommendations, I'm sure no one needs Chapel Roan song recommendations, but After Midnight and Red Wine Supernova are definitely my favourite too from the album. Sorry, spot change. I should add that I filmed that before I read the author's note. And after reading the author's note, I will say I really am glad that the author's note is there. It gives a little bit of context into why she specifically chose Paris and gives you some reading as well if you're interested in finding out more information about what it's like to be gay in Paris at the time. So that's the video. I think this was successful-ish. I mean, I think I've got 2 3 stars, a 4 star and a DNF, so it could be worse. This is the updated version of my Apple Replay for 2024. As you can see, I only changed a little bit. The album's just switched around a bit, and I did listen to a little bit more music through the rest of December as well. I hope you enjoyed this video. Here is to reading more books and listening to new music in 2025, 25